Quran has a greater claim, as you would say. It has a greater claim to say this is the direct speech of God, this is direct speech of Allah.
Why would you not accept it, by the way?
Well, I don't accept it. It doesn't match with the teaching of the scriptures as revealed, okay?
No, I mean, the statement you made that I will not accept.
It's not the same as the message of the Bible.
Yeah, I agree.
And therefore,
I agree. But there are many similarities.
There are obviously some things in common.
Yeah.
There are some
so
things
between
in
the
common,
three faiths, the similar
there
thing
are
is
some things in common, obviously.
Yeah.
We agree with that.
Between the three
and
faiths,
there are some things which are the same, some things which are different. We can say, yeah.
No, but you said have you studied the Quran?
I have read the Quran, yes.
Yes.
Read it all, yeah.
Have you studied
I
about?
wouldn't say I'm not you know,
I agree.
I'm not an imam.
Yeah.
I'm not
Well, neither am I.
studied Islam like that in that sense.
Yes.
I've not studied the Quran in that sense.
What I'm
but
saying
I have
is,
read it. Yes, I have read it.
What I'm saying is that have you
Yeah.
studied the history of the preservation of the Quran?
Um,
Because that's what you were discussing, right? The preservation of the Bible, as you
well-
have seen, is not something that is preserved.
because it claims to be the witness. It claims to be the account of eyewitnesses in the case of the Gospels.
Not in the
okay?
witnesses. You don't even have any manuscripts.
Okay, we do have manuscripts.
From the first
okay.
century, none. From the
well,
second century, maybe a small
Yeah, small
credit card
section.
size
Yeah, you're quite right, yeah.
fragment.
Absolutely right, yeah.
So from first 200 years, you have hardly anything.
Well, I think by the time 200 years have passed, we're getting to pretty much complete books, aren't we? But you're quite right. The first manuscript portion we have, which, like you say, is only about the size of a credit
Yeah.
card, is the John's Gospel passage. Chapter
352, which is only
352,
yeah,
exactly,
it's in John Riley's
And
in
that
Manchester.
is- yeah, because the New Testament was first of all written on papyrus, which was cheap material because the first Christians were poor people. Okay, they wrote it on papyrus. Papyrus decays quite easily. It's amazing, really, that we have as many
But if they can
manuscripts of the New Testament on papyrus.
if they can
as we
preserve
have.
the Dead Sea Scrolls for so many years,
That
yes,
was because
which
that was
is
written on-
prior.
But it wasn't written on papyrus, though, was it? It was written on.
Well,
animal
regardless,
skin.
the point
Okay,
here is that
just like the Quran was written on animal skin.
no, it was
okay?
written on many other things as well.
Yeah, okay.
But the point
So-
here is that if God wanted to preserve your book, He would have, right?
Yes, and we believe He has preserved it.
No,
for
but
us.
this is what you believe.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
the facts shows otherwise. So when you
No.
talk about preservation, you should be able to convincingly show us from the first early centuries whether this is exactly what Jesus preached. Because what we have, what you were just reading there with
Yeah.
all the red letters,
Yes.
this is a claim that this is the words of Jesus.
Okay.
But there's no way to substantiate that
Okay. Yeah.
without a manuscript
okay.
evidence or even an oral tradition like the Muslims have. We have two modes of preservation. We have the manuscripts from the first century Al-Hijra,
Yeah.
plus
And then
we
you
have the
claim
oral
that the oral
tradition.
is exactly the
Exactly.
same
So we have
also.
two very strong modes of preservation.
But the manuscripts do not match the oral tradition.
Have you done the
You've got a
studies?
problem, haven't you?
Have you actually researched this?
I
Because this
have-
is a claim many Christians make,
Yeah,
but they haven't
I
looked
agree.
into the actual
I agree.
research.
I agree. Many
Scholars never
Christians,
mentioned this.
because the Muslim scholars did not tell us until Christians researched it that in fact the Quranic manuscripts
Christians
do not agree with
researched
one
it.
another.
Well, what do you mean the Christians researched
I'm
it?
talking about Christians.
Who do you think preserved these manuscripts? The Christians?
No.
Then who? The
No,
Muslims,
no.
of course.
Yeah, of course the Muslims had to keep the manuscripts, which is why it's surprising there are so few manuscripts from the old times. Yeah, why there's so few?
It's better to have few than zero.
manuscripts. Okay.
It's better to have few than zero.
It is better to have few than zero, but the few that we don't have
Credit card
apparently
size.
do not match the Quran which we have today.
That's your claim. Can you show
Therefore-
you one example
well-
where it doesn't match?
Well, there have been scholars. I'm not a scholar, obviously, in ancient.
Name me a scholar who has actually
Okay,
researched
these
this
people.
and
most
says it's
recently-
different.
Most recently, these people like Dan Brubaker, Dr.
Yeah.
Daniel Brubaker, brought his book out recently.
Yeah.
Before that,
Have you
Steve
actually-
Small,
have you actually looked into
and
those
this
people's-
guy, Gwyn and so on like that. Okay.
So Brubaker
they-
and Keith Small, have you actually looked at the research?
I have read some of their stuff. Yes.
Yes.
I have not. I am not. As
You know
I say,
how
I'm not an
e-
Islamic scholar.
you know
I'm
how
not-
easily
I
they-
am not a scholar in Islamic manuscripts.
I
like
understand.
they are.
Yeah, neither am I.
Okay. Yes.
So what I'm saying is
okay.
this: unless you
Yeah.
actually look at it
Yeah.
from both sides of the argument,
Yeah.
as to what Brubaker is actually saying,
Yeah.
and whether it is up to it stands up to scrutiny,
Yeah.
which it doesn't actually. So there are people who actually have released videos against Brubaker's research. It just shows some of it is so flimsy. Yes.
Really?
So certain manuscript.
Can you point me to a scholar who shows that what Brubaker says is untrue?
Yeah, I
when,
can.
when Brubaker shows the corrections that have been made in the Quran,
Yeah.
and the difference between the Quranic manuscripts and today's accepted Quran,
Yes.
the Quran which is usually recited today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example,
So-
one most important thing is that they look at certain vowels For example, the vowels can be written in different ways, so the alif can be written in different ways. So Brubaker says just because it's written differently in both places, the important point is he doesn't realize that it's pronounced the same.
Okay.
For us, the Quran is a recitation. The very term Quran means to recite too.
Yeah,
Hear me out. Yeah. I'm telling you why it's different. Why Brubaker's research doesn't stand up to scrutiny. So
he shows where things have been inserted or deleted and that kind of thing.
Yeah, he looks at. So he
it's
looks
not just an alif or something like that, like you say. Which
Yeah.
You might say, oh, well, there's just one vowel or whatever, like that.
No, but
it's
because
showing
you haven't
like
looked.
Whole words have been
No.
either
The whole
added or erased.
the whole words which have been
whatever,
added
yeah.
and removed.
Yeah.
What he doesn't realize is that the Quran is actually revealed in 7 different recitations, not just one recital. Yes. So he needs to take that into consideration before he actually makes a statement that this is.
But didn't Uthman standardize the Quran on just one recitation?
No, that's a different thing. You're talking about. There's a difference between the qira'at, which is still.
He said you got to write it in the Qurayshi dialect. Okay?
Yeah,
So there's
so-
only one way, according to Uthman.
Yeah, so the
which it should be.
7 modes of recitation is not that Qurayshi dialect thing. That's
Okay.
different. Okay, that's why I'm saying you need to understand the nuances about researching about this topic. Without that, you won't be able to. And this is exactly the mistake the DCCI make, because what they do is they listen to certain statements from other scholars, and they do not even realize what these scholars were talking about. So when you talk about the 7 modes of recitation, this is the different ways in which it can be recited. So it can be different words being substituted for other words. It can be, for example, a word which might be used in a different way. The same word might be used in
now
different
there are
ways.
still 7 different ways of
Yes,
reciting the Quran?
yes. Still to this day.
Okay.
There you go. So all these Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, all these different ways of reciting, the modes of recitation, is still active to this
So
day.
you're saying that those they're called kirat, okay? I'm right. So you're saying they're called
Yeah.
kirat, okay? Are you saying that those kirat are actually exactly the same as the aruf? I think it's called, isn't it? Right? Which is what the ways in which when Muhammad said you can recite the Quran in 7 different aruf. Is that the correct Arabic term? Yeah.
Yes.
So you're saying that kirat is the same as aruf?
No, I'm not saying it's the same.
Okay.
I'm saying the qira'at, then inside the qira'at there is these different ahruf, which shows the reasoning for these differences within that. So there are 2 different things, not the same thing. But the important point is this: all these 7 qira'at was already revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see, in his time, it wasn't something that was invented later on. Like for example, if you look at the Catholic book and the Protestant book, you don't even agree about the number of books in there. Yes? So the Protestants say we have 66 only. The Catholics say no, we have 73 books.
Yeah,
So-
the Catholics accept all the 66 plus some
No,
more,
all the
right?
73,
Yeah,
yes.
plus some more,
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. They do not even agree upon the number of books, let alone whether there are mistakes in it. So if you look at scholars like Bart Ehrman, who are actually scholars of the New Testament and who research the history of the preservation of these books, they say this person is not some lay person who is just saying.
No, he's a scholar.
Yeah, exactly. He's just not putting out his statements from thin air. So when he makes statements like there are as many differences between the different manuscripts, so the Christians claim that there are 5,000 manuscripts, that is besides the point. If you do not have the autographs, the originals, or even from the manuscript from the 1st century, there is no way for anyone to identify what Jesus said from what was found in the 4th century.
Well, this is the whole scholarly study of textual criticism. isn't
Exactly,
it?
yes,
Exactly.
yes. Yes.
By comparing the manuscripts and
Yes.
seeing there are some small variations.
No, not
of
small.
course.
That's
There
what
are
I'm telling
small
you.
variations between the manuscripts.
My friend.
But by comparing them all, we can deduce what is the original version. Okay.
This is the claim of the Christians that there are only minor differences.
Yeah.
But if you look at the actual scholars like Bart Ehrman, what they say is that there are so many.
No.
Hear me out.
I think Bart Ehrman would agree that.
No. This is
there's-
the. Okay, I'll tell you what.
Well,
I'll tell you exactly what Bart Ehrman said about the number of differences in the. Just put this away. Sorry. The variances that's found in the manuscripts. I'll tell you exactly what Bart Ehrman said. In fact, he says something like there are so many variances. There are as many variances as there are number of words in the New Testament.
yeah, of course, there are thousands of
Exactly.
variants between the thousands of manuscripts.
So they don't agree
okay?
with each other. That's the point he
There
was
are-
making.
There are, if you have, right? Okay, there are thousands of variants between the thousands of manuscripts. Okay.
Okay.
But I think you'll find that Bart Ehrman is pretty happy about the text of the New Testament.
What? I mean, the core of the belief is this is changed.
Yeah. So I just want to not quote, misquote him.
I got it. Right, this is what Bart Ehrman says in. I will just check what I'm going to quote from. So if you want to look it up, you can.
Yeah, give me the
for
reference.
yourself, okay.
I'll quote from Bart Ehrman in misquoting Jesus.
Okay, I'm going to quote from misquoted Jesus as well.
Okay, good.
So-
You quote
so he
first
says-
if you want, or I can go first.
Quite a long quote. I'm sorry about this, but he says he's talking about his co-author Bruce Metzger, who is also a scholar. Okay.
Bruce Metzger was a teacher of Bart Ehrman. Did you know
That's
that?
right. Yes.
He was actually a Christian.
He studied under under Bruce Metzger.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's
But
right.
Bart Ehrman left Christianity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
carry
he
on.
says Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in this field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him. And even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. If he and I were put into a room, I'm losing the quote now here. Sorry. If he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands.
So this is not from a book.
So
Is this a preface?
this
What
is
is that?
This is from Misquoting Jesus, page 252.
Okay.
Misquoting Jesus, page 252.
Read the last paragraph there.
So
The position I agree.
The position I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants
Okay.
in the manuscript edition of the New Testament.
So good. Now we are discussing
Okay.
the actual doctrines of Christianity. So the doctrines remain the same.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. He would say there's
but
nothing in
the
Christian
point
doctrine
that we were
affected by
discussing was the actual text itself. Now let's see what Bruce Metzger says. Wait.
He says that the last paragraph before that, he says
Yeah,
that
go on.
there would only be 1 or 2 dozen places in the whole of the New Testament, okay, where he and Bruce Metzger would disagree upon what the text of the New Testament is.
No, he says about
Okay.
the teachings.
No,
Read that again, the last paragraph.
That's the last paragraph. The paragraph I read before that says,
Yeah.
That one. Which one's which?
if he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands.
Okay.
So he's saying although there are many thousands of places where you have variants in the manuscripts, Ian and Professor Metzger would have only maybe 1 or 2,000 places where they would be in disagreement about what the original text
Probably.
is.
The important point there is probably.
Of course,
So this is
of
because
course.
he doesn't have
Yeah.
the original.
Of course, he doesn't have the
Autographs.
original manuscripts,
Yeah.
and therefore he cannot say this is 100% certain.
Yeah.
To what
So
they
now
say.
we are going on
That's why he
probability.
uses
Now
the word probably.
yeah, let's see what Bruce Metzger, his teacher, actually says about this. So Bruce Metzger says, sorry, where's it going? Here it is. So this is Bruce Metzger from the New Testament, a historical introduction to the early Christian writings.
Yeah.
Okay? Oh, sorry, that is Bart Ehrman actually. Let me
Bart
bring up
Ehrman, yeah.
Bruce Metzger. Oh, here it is. So this is, from the same book, the text of the New Testament, its transmission, corruption, and restoration.
Yeah.
This is from Bruce Metzger.
Yeah.
Okay, it says, none of the original documents of the New Testament is extant, and existing copies differ from one another. The textual critic seeks to ascertain from the divergent copies which form of the text should be regarded as most conforming to the original. So you already agree that none of the originals exist.
That's
yes?
right, yeah.
And then there are,
Christians would agree with him on that. You know, we don't have the original manuscripts as they're written
Yes.
by the original author.
and the existing copies differ from one another. Now, the important point is that Bart Ehrman, in misquoting Jesus, this is what he says. It is one thing to say that the originals were inspired, but the reality is that we don't have the originals. So saying that they were inspired doesn't help me much unless I can reconstruct the originals. This is Bart Ehrman. And then he goes on to say, moreover, the vast majority of Christians of the entire history of the church have not had access to the originals,
Yeah.
making their inspiration something of a moot point. Okay, so you can say I'm inspired regardless of that. They don't have the original. So your inspiration is just your claim. And then he goes on to say, wait, I haven't finished yet. He goes on to say, not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies of the originals. We don't even have the copies of the originals.
I think that's a bit of a claim myself. But
Or
anyway, yeah.
copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. Let me finish and then you can say.
Yeah.
Okay?
Because as
What
you
we
said,
have,
that
I'll let you finish.
P52 is only
Yeah,
less than 100
I let you
years
finish.
after. Yeah.
You
Okay,
let me
yeah.
finish the quote and then we
Okay,
can
yeah.
talk about
Okay, yeah.
because it's important you listen to what Badr Amin is actually
Okay,
saying.
carry on.
Okay, so what he's saying is that not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies of the originals, we don't even have the copies of the copies of the originals, or the copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. Yes? What we have are copies made later, much later. In most instances, they are copies made many centuries later. And these copies all differ from one another in many thousands of places,
Yeah, there are
centuries
thousands
later.
of variations,
Okay.
minor variations.
The important point there is centuries later. You know, in one video, I actually heard
There are
Badr Amin say,
manuscripts which are used, which are centuries after. Yes, true.
You know how many centuries
There are.
after?
There are some which are centuries
most of your
after.
manuscripts are how many centuries after? Do you know?
Most of them will be, as you say, centuries after.
How many?
Yeah,
Just give a
majority.
guess, go on.
Because, well,
Take a
well,
take a
you know,
guess.
typically we would say there are 5,800 whatever Greek manuscripts. 5,800.
How many years after?
56, I think is the latest figure or whatever. Yeah. So
That's a
and
moot
most
point.
of those would not be within the first 2 centuries.
So
as
when
you
when is your
They will be from 300,
where is your
500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1000 AD, etc. Yeah.
the bulk of your manuscripts is from which century? Do you know?
Uh,
Or after
well,
which century?
I would say probably from after 500, after 500 AD. Will probably be
Sorry,
the
after?
majority of them definitely from after 500 AD. I would say. Yeah?
Actually,
okay.
more further than that.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
I heard
Because-
Badr Amin actually
because-
state this.
Yes.
He said majority, he said 94% or something like that of the manuscripts of the New Testament are from the 9th century onwards.
Okay.
9th century. You know how many
So
years?
800
That is nearly a millennia after Jesus.
No, 800 onwards. Okay.
Yes?
700 years after.
Nearly a millennia after,
no, no.
after Jesus. Now you tell me, by the way, let me
Okay.
finish the last paragraph he says.
Right, okay.
He says these
Just
copies
a-
differ from one another in so many
Sure, it's the same
places.
with the Quran. There are more manuscripts the later you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have everything.
That is normal.
Remember,
That is
we-
normal.
We have two modes of
Manuscripts, okay?
preservation. So
Yeah.
our most important or the primary mode of preservation has always been the oral tradition. And we have the names. We have the names of the people.
Yeah.
The
and that
chain.
is
The chain of.
That is a problem, isn't it?
No, it's not. We have the
It is
chain
a
of
problem
transmission.
because-
We have the
because
chain of transmission, which means.
you do not know that what you're reciting now is the same.
Of course we
as
do.
was recited
Of course we do.
In the first centuries of
In fact,
Islam.
we don't only know. We don't.
But you have no proof of it.
My
other
friend,
than
I said we
other
have the
than
first
written
century manuscripts. We have the first century Al-Hijra
Only the
manuscripts.
written manuscripts can prove
Hold
that
on.
what you're reciting
We have the
now
first
is
century Al-Hijra
certain
manuscripts.
men.
You're not listening.
Yeah.
We have the first century Al-Hijra manuscripts, which you don't have from the first century. We have
No.
from the first century of our prophet. You don't have first century
But
from Jesus.
the first century manuscripts that you're referring to probably Sana, yeah? Okay.
No,
You're
not only
referring to
Sana. We have the
Sana.
top copy, the Sana.
Well,
we have the
Topkapi is
Birmingham
not from the
manuscripts.
first century, is it?
Sorry?
Topkapi is not from the first century of Islam.
First century Al-Hijra. It is from the first century Al-Hijra. Yes.
Topkapi is
It
not
is from
the
within.
first century
It is.
of Islam.
Of course it is.
No, it's not.
Top copy is.
No.
Which century is it from?
It's I don't know. I'll have to look up, but
Yeah.
I think that Topkapi is like late 700s or beginning of 800s, something like that.
Late 700s is the first century Al-Hijra.
Uh,
570, 632.
That's almost 200 years after,
So late-
after Muhammad.
When two
Okay.
Muslims never met each
Yeah.
other and they will recite the same Quran.
Exactly.
Well,
From
yeah,
two
of
different
course,
continents.
nowadays, because they're all reciting what was
But that was
down
like-
in the
No,
in
no,
the
no,
Quran.
no.
Bring two,
Yeah.
two Muslims who will recite different things.
By the way, did you
well,
say what he
there
said? He said because they were written down now. You know, before
Yeah.
they were reciting the same, and many places, even today, yes, they still recite orally through the teacher. No, wait. This is the bit which you don't understand. You know why most Christians they rely only on the written and they don't give much precedence to the oral?
Because you think it's more objective.
No, wait.
Okay,
I'll tell you
it's more
why.
trustworthy.
Shall I tell you why?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the tradition of the oral preservation.
Original language is lost.
Exactly.
We would say, yeah, you're right. We would not.
You don't have the tradition. In fact, forget about the tradition. Forget about the oral tradition. You don't even know, like the brother just pointed out, the language it was revealed to with Jesus preached in. What language did he preach in?
Well, I think he probably spoke more than one language, okay?
No, which language did he
spoke more than
preach in?
one
I didn't ask you
language.
what language he spoke.
I guess a lot of the time he spoke in Aramaic.
Exactly.
Sometimes he was speaking Hebrew, maybe.
You know, you said I guess.
and-
You know why
Oh,
you said
yeah.
I guess?
Yeah.
Because you're not certain. So you're not even certain about the language, let alone the preservation of the manuscripts. This is the difference between Islam and Christianity.
Yes.
We have from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam the original. Wait.
Yeah.
The original in Arabic. It was preserved orally.
I don't think you have the original in Arabic.
No, original language Arabic.
Okay, you
Okay.
have the language.
The original
Yeah.
preservation
Yeah.
to the letter, because we have not only the chain of the hadiths, you know, they say the chain of narrations. We have the chain of transmission. You know what that means? It
Yes.
means every teacher
Yes.
who taught his student,
Yes.
and that student taught his student,
Yeah.
that chain is preserved to this day. So anyone, wait, hear me out. Anyone who is a qari, yes, the person who has the, what do you say, the qualification of teaching with the correct tajweed, with the correct pronunciation of the Quran. So not only the wording is preserved, but also its preservation is preserved. Sorry, its pronunciation is preserved. So do you not see how important it is for us to maintain even the pronunciation of every letter of the Quran? So not only preservation of the actual letters, but even the way it's pronounced. So for example, if you look at the term Yod Ha Waha of Yahweh that they usually pronounce it, this is without consonants. So when anyone says Yahweh, they are not certain whether the people at that time, during the time of Moses, actually pronounced it as Yahweh. That is the reason that most of the Jews, they will write it in the Torah, but they will never ever pronounce it, because they don't want to mispronounce the most holy name of God. Yes? The reason you know this, and many people who have studied this know this, is because it shows how important it is to get the pronunciation correct. Because mispronouncing the name of God is one of the most heinous sins they consider as. It's committing a big sin. The same goes with the Muslims. If we mispronounce deliberately the Quran, the verses of the Quran, it can change the meaning. It can change the meaning of those particular verses, because the certain terms in Arabic, like the term qalb, which is heart, and qalb, yes, to a person who's not, who doesn't know Arabic, who is not, or even the basics of Arabic, they will think that this is the same word.
It's like park and bark.
Exactly, a park and bark. Yeah, good one. So what we are, by the way, just to show you the way the Quran has been preserved is very meticulous. So the term qalb is heart, and the term qalb is dog. Yes, they might sound to an untrained ear same, but they are very different in meaning and also different in pronunciation. That is the reason it's very important for us to make sure that the words are pronounced correctly in the Quran, the letters are written correctly, and they're pronounced correctly when somebody reads it. Because even reading a statement in English, for example, the term broad in English, yes, it can have two different meanings. The term broad can be very wide, or it can be a woman who is not, you know what I mean? So the same word, exact same pronunciation even, but without the context, it loses its meaning. And that is the reason, if you don't even know the original language of Jesus' preaching, can you imagine how dangerous it is?
What we have is the Greek, okay?
Exactly.
Yes, that's right, okay, which was recorded by his eyewitnesses, okay? So
Sorry, recorded by whom?
The eyewitnesses give us the Greek.
Give me one eyewitness who recorded it in
Matthew.
Greek. Where does it say Matthew recorded it in Greek?
Matthew, John recorded in
No,
Greek.
these people, the
These
Greek.
people wrote
Wait.
the New Testament in Greek.
Have you not?
Okay?
If you look at Bart Ehrman and Metzger's statements in their books, yes, you will come to the understanding that the four Gospels, they were not written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. The the people to whom the names have been attributed. By the way, even these names, they were attributed much later on. Yes, so it says, you know, the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew. Yes, this term. This attribution was made much later on. John didn't write John. Matthew didn't write Matthew. This was written by other people who are well versed in Greek.
Would Metzger say that?
Why don't you read his book? You'll know, because you know
He
Bruce.
doesn't say that.
Well, look,
doesn't say
I
that.
haven't studied Bruce
He doesn't
Metzger's,
say that.
but But Bart Ehrman certainly says
Yeah,
this.
Bart Ehrman is a skeptic who makes his money by writing books.
Oh,
okay?
come on.
Okay.
After you quoted him, this is what you have to say about
I'm
him?
quoting him because you
Because it
quoted
agrees
him.
with you.
Because you were quoting him and I quoted
So
him
the
to show.
so the paragraph
to show
which
that-
agreed with you, you said
show-
it's okay to quote
show-
that, but then he says he does it for money. You know why he left Christianity?
By the way, when he wrote this book, was he Christian or not?
No, he wasn't.
No, it was not Christian when he was writing the book.
Do you know why he left Christianity?
I don't know the precise reason.
Do you think
why
it
he
was
left
after
Christianity.
studying the Gospels or before?
Oh, he was a Greek scholar before. Yeah, that's right.
No,
yeah.
but did he leave after he studied it?
Yeah,
and he
studied-
realizes
he studied,
that
he
the
studied
he-
he studied and then he rejected.
Yeah.
Okay, it's that way around.
So
yeah.
that's what I'm saying. He
Right.
studied it
Yeah.
when he realized that they do not comply.
Yeah.
Yes, there's no way to substantiate what Jesus actually preached and his teachings in the 1st century to 9th century when majority of your manuscripts are found.
Yeah.
Yes?
But
You know,
Bruce
there's a
Metzger
huge
didn't
gap.
leave, did he? And he was equally a scholar. Okay?
Yeah, I didn't, but,
Okay.
but if
So-
Bruce Metzger himself says that there are several differences between the manuscripts,
Yeah.
what does it tell you? How can you reconcile something if you don't have the originals, or even something from the 1st century? How can you do that?
Well, that's what they do. That's what textual scholars do, isn't it? Textual critical. Those scholars of textual criticism. That's what they do.
How do you think
they
they
look
do
at all
it?
the manuscripts and they determine what the original was.
No, they don't
And-
say.
and then
They don't
Bruce
say what the
Metzger
original was.
And even Bart Ehrman says that he and Bruce Metzger wouldn't disagree other than in more than one or two dozen places.
Yeah, but his other statement in his
Said.
latest book says otherwise.
I don't think so. No.
The book that was written, which is Misquoting Jesus, was
Yeah.
much later after.
Yeah, that's what I just quoted from. I just told
No,
you
actually
that's
it
where
was-
he actually says it was from Misquoting Jesus. Actually, told you that he says that he and Bruce
Yeah,
Metzger.
but he
wouldn't
was talking.
agree.
He was talking about the
Okay.
teachings of or what would probably be found in the 1st century.
He was saying that if he and Bruce Metzger had to hammer out the original text of the New Testament, they would not
So if
disagree
he-
that in more than one or two dozen places.
Yeah.
At the most.
You know what?
Yeah.
Bruce Metzger was his teacher.
Yes.
Yes?
That's right.
But afterwards, when Jesus says, sorry, not Jesus, Bart Ehrman says in the same book
Yeah.
that there are as many differences in the manuscripts as there are number of words in the New Testament.
Yeah, that's right. Because there are hundreds and thousands of manuscripts, so of course there are hundreds.
So how do you
and thousands
reconcile if you have hundreds of
variations.
thousands of differences?
We know there are many variations. You know, some manuscripts they have abbreviations, which other manuscripts
No,
don't
not
have.
abbreviations. These are
Some
major
manuscripts
differences.
Have this and the other, etc. Of course, and then there are of course mistakes that people made when they were copying. When they
These copies-
accidentally left out a word.
Yeah,
or
listen to
whatever,
this.
yeah?
These copies differ from one another in so many places that we don't even know how many differences there are. Possibly it's easiest to put it in comparative terms. There are more differences among our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. Bart Ehrman in Misquoting Jesus. Now, the same goes with the Old
That's
Testament.
right. That's right. Because there are 1.5 million whatever words. Okay, and from that they have so many 100,000 variants. Okay, but that is not a lot.
That is
Okay,
a lot.
is not a lot.
Because if you look at the example that that Bart Ehrman gives in his book,
If we were to look at manuscripts of the Quran, we would find an equally a similar proportion.
No,
if
you
not
wouldn't.
greater,
Definitely
of,
not.
Of variants.
Definitely not.
Because there are many variants within the.
Okay,
within
quote
the
me one scholar who says there are as many differences as there are.
I can't quote your scholars.
Well, you quoted Bart Ehrman, so I'm
What
sure
saying is-
you're
what I'm
making a
saying
statement
is-
about the Quran.
what I'm
You should
saying
back it
is-
up.
What I'm saying is there are variants in the Quran.
Bring your evidence.
Okay,
That's a
bring
claim
my
you made, so bring your evidence, substantiate it. If you can't, then let's leave it at that until you have the evidence. Because the differences are, like I said, in the vowels, for example. Like the alif is written different way. So if you're looking at hundreds of manuscript which has hundreds of alifs in it,
But I
Which is the most
suggest
common
that
letter.
That you go and have a look at, for example, Dan Brubaker's books.
I told you, there are people who have already...
Quran, and he sees not just a vowel missing here or whatever, yeah. He sees words missing, words added, words changed, etc., and a whole more than even one word, often several words at once. Okay, so that
You know,
that
there's a
that
brother-
is- that is clear evidence.
No,
that
it's
there
not.
are very
In fact, all this can be looked into, and there is already a brother who's made a video against it. Go and watch it. I think it's a brother Farid from Bahrain who has made a clip on Brubaker's mistakes that he has made in his book, which he claims there are variances in the Quran in manuscripts. Yes. If you look at even that small clip of his, you'll see how unscholarly that work is of Brubaker. That he makes claims which anyone who's even, by the way, Brother Farid is not even a scholar in the manuscript, but even he could pick out like how flimsy these claims of Prophet Quran. So go and look it up. Besides, you know Jesus was a messenger. Do you not agree? Did he claim to be God in any of the? Why did he claim?
I don't want to get into a separate debate on the Trinity with you.
No, it's not. It's just about It's just about Jesus' own statements, which would actually go against what he just said.
Keep saying the one who sent me. Sorry, I've got a message from my brother about my other brother who's in
This is a modern way of Saved by the Bell.
I am saved by the bell.
Saved by the text message. Alright, no problem. What's your name? Sorry. Julian, very nice speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully we'll take up the divinity of Jesus next time if you're free.
I know that's your favorite.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum brothers and sisters. Hope this video was helpful for you. This may help others too, so please consider sharing, and we will bring more videos in the future inshallah. So consider subscribing and you won't miss any. Jazakallahu khairan.